Hello, Mrs. Lambrick's fourth graders. First, let me start by apologizing for the delay on chapter 18. I volunteered to read a chapter, and I've had a heck of a time trying to get it uploaded to YouTube. So the delay is my fault. Sometimes technology is only as good as the user. So I'm going to be reading a portion of chapter 18 through page 241, and then I'm going to make a presumption that Mrs. Lambrick's or some other guest reader is going to read 242 and beyond. So here we go, chapter 18 of Another Story. Chapter 18. When Gateman and the professor arrived in the tiny village, the professor removed the magazine from his pocket, and the two men began the arduous task of going door to door, showing Ethan's photo to everyone they met, asking if they had seen the brilliant scientist. They asked at the inn, the bakery, the fish shop, the vegetable market, and every little house within walking distance, but no one could remember having seen Mr. Cheeseman. This may have been due to the fact that he was the most normal-looking member of his traveling group. "I knew it," said the professor, angrily stuffing the magazine back into his pocket. "As long as it took us to get here, they're probably long gone by now." "I told you I can't walk fast in these shoes," Gateman retorted. "Besides, there's still one place we haven't checked." There had been a changing of the guard by the time Gateman and professor approached the castle. Two fresh sentries with fresh lances watched the two bickering men waddle up to the gate. The guard shouted a warning in Danish, and the professor responded with one of the few Danish words he had learned over the last 3 weeks of waiting around in Denmark. "Hey," he said. "Hey," said the guards. "We're looking for a friend of ours." The guards seemed confused and muttered something in Danish. The professor repeated his words, this time louder and more slowly. If the guards didn't understand English, he reasoned, perhaps they would if it were presented to them at a slower pace and a greater volume. The guards responded by repeating what they had said louder and more slowly. The professor looked confused and said even more loudly and slowly than the previous two times, "We're looking for a friend of ours." Gateman rolled his eyes and shook his head. At this rate, he thought, they would all grow very old and very deaf before anything was accomplished. "Show them the picture," he urged with an elbow to the ribs. "Oh, yes," said the professor, removing the magazine from his pocket. "This man. We're looking for this man." The guards leaned in for a closer look. "Ja," said one guard, nodding and pointing over his shoulder with his thumb. "Der Videgild Jallis." "What the heck is Videgild Jallis?" said Gateman. "I don't know," said the professor, "but it seems as though Ethan Cheeseman is somewhere inside this castle. Did you hear that? We found him! We found him at last!" The professor was so happy he almost hugged Gateman before quickly remembering that he had a rather strong dislike for the man. Instead, he turned to the guards and explained very loudly and very slowly that he and his assistant needed to see the man in the picture immediately. The guards shook their heads and ran off a long explanation in Danish, pointing to the castle and miming the acts of eating and drinking. "What did they say?" asked Gateman. "I'm not sure," said the professor, "but I think I heard something about a shindig. I guess we'll just have to come back later." The professor walked away and Gateman hurried after him. "Later?" The professor's lack of assertiveness was making Gateman crazy. "Don't you know anything about getting past security? Give me some coins." "What?" "Some money. Give me some money." Gateman thrust his palm a little too close to the professor's face. After nearly a month of waiting around in Denmark, staying at inns and eating at restaurants, the professor's cash reserves were running dangerously low. He pulled a couple of the few remaining coins from his pocket and handed them to Gateman. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" "Watch and learn," said Gateman. He approached the guards with a casual swagger and a swarmy grin. "Hey, fellas, looking good today. I simply must get the name of your tailor. And who does your hair? You have to tell me his name and what size bowl he uses. Now listen. I realize we don't have an invitation to this little shindig of yours, but perhaps my good friend Mr. Gateman paused to check whose likeness appeared on the coins. "Fat guy with a beard might convince you to let us in." With a wink, he handed the coins to the guards, who thanked Gateman and with wild smiles and eagerly pocketed the money. Gateman waited, but the guards did not give the signal to lower the drawbridge. "Okay," he said. "This is the part where you turn the other way while we sneak inside." The guard smiled and nodded, but did nothing else. "All right, listen, you simpletons. Haven't you ever taken a bribe before? This is ridiculous. I'm dealing with a bunch of amateurs here." Professor Boxley grabbed Gateman by the elbow and pulled him away from the scene. "Nice job," he said. "I learned a lot. Now, let's get back to the inn." They've got to come out of the castle sooner or later, and when they do, we'll be waiting." "More waiting?" huffed Gateman. "I mean, more waiting, hooray!" The long, narrow banquet table of the great hall was set with fine china and polished silver of the quality that one might expect to find at a shindig in honor of the white gold chalice being returned to its rightful owner. Various smells wafted in from the kitchen, all of which received no lower than an 8.4 rating from Teddy, who had already planted his bubblegum firmly on his forehead in anticipation of the coming feast. "I'm starving," he said. "When do we eat?" We can't eat until our host arrives," said Mr. Cheeseman. "It takes a long time to tend to a broken foot." "I like it here," said Teddy, taking in the splendor of the room. "Do we have to go back on the boat right away?" "I think we could all use some time ashore," said Mr. Cheeseman, "but we shouldn't leave the LVR sitting where it is for too long. It'll be winter by the time we get back. Besides, the way Pinky's been growling, I don't think we should stay here any longer than we have to." Trumpets sounded, temporarily drowning out Pinky's growling. All rose as the Duke hobbled into the room on his heavily bandaged foot with the help of 2 servants, who escorted him to the head of the table where the precious chalice awaited him. Big leaned across the table and whispered to Chip and Penny, "Pinky's not the only one who thinks little of this Duke character. I can say without reservation that I am not so fond of him myself." "I know what you mean," said Chip. "There's something a little off about him." "I'm hungry," said Teddy. "See," said No-Face Roy. The Duke's servants pulled out his chair and lowered his wide posterior to the seat. Instantly and without warning, the chair collapsed as if it were made of popsicle sticks, sending the Duke's plump backside and his broken foot crashing hard to the floor. The Duke said something in Danish that sounded to Teddy like swear words. In fact, to Teddy, most words in Danish sounded like swear words. The Duke's servants hurried to help him up and called for a replacement chair. "The Duke seems to be having a run of bad luck," said Jibby. "Yes," said Penny. "It's almost as if he's cursed." "Are you sure the Duke of Jutland is the rightful owner of this chalice?" Mr. Cheeseman asked. "Sure as can be," said Jibby. "I've done my research. Well, I can promise you that." When the Duke's backup chair arrived, he ordered 3 of his servants to sit in it at once, one on top of the other, in order to check its sturdiness. It passed the test, and he took a seat, then cleared his throat. "Welkom stoord til alles jaar. Jij wil lieken du mach en toaster." "What did he say?" whispered Jake. "I think he said, 'I would like to make a toast,'" said Jibby. "Well," said Sammy, "it's a good thing he speaks perfect English." The Duke raised the white gold chalice, and the dinner guests hoisted their glasses as well. "Till my honored gesten." He drank to his honored guests, then clapped his hands twice sharply, and out came the food. Platters of fine delicacies arrived one after another. Among the happiest to see the food were Pinky and Diggs, whose ribs were beginning to show after nearly a month at sea, and they quickly devoured their platefuls of Danish sausage and waited for more. Teddy gave all the food a very high grade, but rated none higher than the gravy, which he found to be absolutely perfect. Not for eating, but for something else. When he was certain no one was looking, he dipped his finger into the bowl and then dabbed at his sock puppet. He dipped and dabbed twice more, and that's how, in a matter of seconds, No-Face Roy, formerly Rat-Face Roy, became Gravy-Face Roy. "This is the best meal ever," said Teddy. "No offense, Juanita." Juanita smiled her Spanish smile and scruffed up Teddy's spiky hair. "Sin animo de offender adoptadas." "I couldn't agree more," said Gravy-Face Roy. And that was about the extent of the conversation at the table. Everyone was so hungry that they could not stop eating long enough to engage in idle chit-chat. Finally, Yannick spoke loudly over the sounds of enthusiastic chewing. "Well," he said, breaking the awkward silence, "perhaps his lordship would be kind enough to regale us with one of his many humorous anecdotes." "Ja," said the Duke, his mouth full of partially chewed sausage. If the Duke's English was less than perfect, it was even less than perfect with a mouthful of sausage. He started into a story including the phrases, "Look out! Millions of noodles!" and "Buried alive," which turned out to be the punchline. Yannick heartily laughed out loud too heartily, and the Duke's honored guests followed suit. The Duke laughed too. Then he suddenly stopped laughing. He also suddenly stopped breathing. He reached for his throat. His face turned purple. "Something's happened to the Duke," yelled Yannick. "He's choking," said Penny. Mr. Cheeseman sprang to his feet, knocking his chair over in the process. He sprinted the length of the table and positioned himself behind the purple Duke. He wrapped his arms around their choking host, placing his fist just below his sternum. "What are you doing to his lordship?" shouted Yannick. "Assassin! Assassin!" Guards rushed towards Ethan. He drove his fist into the Duke's chest, but nothing happened. He tried again, and just as the guards were about to descend upon him, a large piece of sausage shot from the Duke's throat like a rocket to the moon. With quickness never seen before from a man his size, the Duke reached out and caught the meaty projectile in midair, like a shortstop stretching out for a sharp-line drive. He inspected the sausage briefly, then popped it back into his mouth and swallowed it with a satisfied grunt. "You saved the Duke's life!" exclaimed Yannick. "Ja," said the Duke, helping himself to another plateful of sausage. "Du har saved mit life." As he continued eating, he spoke to Yannick at great length. Yannick did not seem at all pleased with what the Duke was telling him. The two argued back and forth until Yannick finally gave in. He pressed his lips firmly together and addressed Mr. Cheeseman. "The Duke is most grateful. He wishes me to tell you that you and your friends are welcome to stay for as long as you like." This was excellent news for the weary travelers. After dinner, they were given the opportunity to bathe, and each was presented with a change of clothes and a fine silk sleeping gown. Despite all the growling from their hairless psychic dog, the Duke was turning out to be a fabulous host. Perhaps Pinky was losing her touch, thought Penny. After being fed 2 platefuls of delicious sausage, Pinky also thought she might be losing her touch. Maybe she'd been wrong about the Duke after all. The castle was large enough that they could each have their own room, but creepy enough that none of them chose to do so. Jibby's crew all paired off while Penny and Big agreed to share a room, and Mr. Cheeseman opted to bunk with Chip, Teddy, and Gravy-Faced Roy. After sleeping in hammocks on a moving ship for the past 3.5 weeks, the down-filled beds were like heaven, and soon everyone fell into a coma-like sleep. Everyone, that is, but Teddy, who could not stop thinking about all the delicious food he had eaten earlier. His stomach was calling for more, and would not take no for an answer. Quietly, he slipped from beneath the covers and stepped over Pinky and Diggs, curled up together and snoring softly at the foot of his bed. He successfully tiptoed from the room without waking his bunkmates and set out to find the kitchen. Candles along the walls provided poor lighting for the long hallway, and Teddy quickly became confused. He took a turn down another hallway and followed it until it ended, forcing him to go either left or right. He took a right and soon found himself at the end of this hallway as well. But this time there was no left or right, just a closed door that Teddy had no reason to believe did not lead to the kitchen. He turned the knob and opened the door to find the kitchen, but a small empty room. A rug had been rolled away to reveal an open hatch with stairs leading down, and perhaps, he thought, to the kitchen. His stomach urging him on, Teddy descended the stairs slowly, as the light below was quite dim. At the bottom of the steps, Teddy found himself in another hallway, the ceiling low and the air damp and musty. The floor beneath his bare feet had turned from stone to cool earth. As he inched forward down the dank corridor, confidence in his ability to find the kitchen dwindled with each and every step. He was about to turn back when suddenly he smelled food. Yes, definitely food. He quickened his pace and walked to the end of the hallway, turned left and screamed at the sight of the man coming toward him. The man screamed too and ran headlong into Teddy, dropping the tray he was carrying, dishes smashing and cutlery clanging off the hard dirt floor. The man looked at Teddy with rage in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" Yannick demanded. Teddy stepped back slowly. "I was hungry," he said apologetically. "I was looking for the kitchen." "The kitchen?" said Yannick, softening his tone. "Now why on earth would you think the kitchen was down here?" "I smelled food." "Ah, yes," said Yannick with a chuckle. "Easy explanation for that. I was just feeding the cats, you see." Teddy looked at the broken dishes and the cutlery on the ground. "You feed them with a fork?" "They're very particular, I'm afraid," said Yannick. "You know cats. But I thought you said there were no animals in the castle." "Allowed in the castle." "Did I?" said Yannick with a forced chuckle. "Well, when you think about it, this isn't really part of the castle." "It isn't?" Yannick bent to gather up the mess on the floor. "No, it's the basement. Looks like a dungeon," said Teddy. "Sure does," said Gravy-Faced Roy. "A dungeon?" said Yannick, incredulous at the very thought. "That's absurd. We have no use for such things around here. Now, what do you say we go to the kitchen and get you something to eat?"